Welcome to Self-Perfected.
We're nice.
Hello, we're here.
Hello.
Episode 100. We're breaking off our first hundo.
Damn.
What do you guys feel? How do you feel about that right now?
Senti.
That's a lot of podcasts.
Wow.
Did you ever believe that you'd have your own podcast with 100 episodes?
Yeah, I mean, once we decided to do this, I was like, I know we're not going to stop. And I mean,
We
So-
were
Can't
gonna
stop.
stop. I thought after episode 5 that was like, all right, that's enough.
I
Hold
thought
on, let me ask you a
especially
question. What how many episodes do you have on y'all's Drake and Christine show?
7?
Oh, really? Oh, I only saw 5. That's why
I
was
think
saying that.
6.
Oh, 6.
We did
I only
7.
saw
we,
5.
we still have to
I didn't
We've
see
been
6 yet.
recording some and not posting them. And so we just keep going. It's like 6, 7, 8.
like your own like couple therapy or something. Well, I thought we would have been, so there was like 2 main parts where I thought we would have definitely got censored. One was during the whole BLM thing when we made that episode called Brainwash Lives Matter. That was really funny. That's like episode 13 or something. And then the other was for sure during the whole vaccine fiasco. Man, we were not holding back. That was so fun. Because it's like, okay, at what part are they just gonna like?
We've talked about World War III. It's like,
I know.
What can we
We're just
possibly-
like under the radar.
We
Look
need
at us.
to make the audience bigger if we want to be deplatformed. We're not
Oh.
influencing enough people yet.
maybe that's
Got a
it.
good point.
Maybe
Mm.
that's it.
That should be our next goal. By episode 200, we don't even make it because we're deplatformed.
By episode 200, let's have 200 people who watch the podcast.
In total, across
Every
all
episode adds one more listener.
Well, for those of you who've been with us since episode 1, congrats. We made it. For those of you
I
who
wonder how
joined us
many
at
people
episode
actually listen to
99,
every episode.
Congrats. You
I
made
know
it.
some people who've listened to pretty much every episode where they like
They
work
should.
and then they're like, yeah.
They should.
There's
If
a
they
lot in
listen
there.
past this part, I mean, they're like a hardcore fan.
For those of you who are just kind of tapping in now, you should if you want to get messed up, confused, and like red pilled for actual real, go back and start listening from the beginning. That will
99 episodes. Go back to the beginning.
We because it's like we're not just talking about current events and stuff. We're giving perspective that especially it builds.
Yeah,
And we
the
give lots
foundational
of points,
podcasts
yeah.
are at the beginning for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we
So
could
there's-
talk about current events. Current events are fun.
Well, we do, but I'm just saying it's like that's not the point. It's not like it's a current event podcast. We're just
I got
taking
a current
whatever's going
event for
on.
you.
What?
Literally last week, there was an interview with the White House press secretary asking, "Is Biden healthy? Is like, can he run another term? Like, what do you think?"
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, you can't even ask these questions. Like, come on." And we found out this week he's very healthy. He rides bikes. You know, he talks to the press. He's a very
Didn't he fall off his bike?
Yes.
Hey.
He's got his own style.
Oh, sorry, we can't talk about that.
No, I think they deliberately do those bike rides to show that he's cognitively.
Even
With
though he fell off.
But that's the point. Is like they're doing it to show that because remember there was like a big thing. I remember that I don't remember when it was, but it was a long time ago. You know, in the beginning of his presidency or something, where they were challenging that point, and then they put out a video of him like driving like a Mustang or something like that. It was like on purpose to show like, hey, look, he can do this thing or whatever. But then there was a little conspiracy because like if you look at the picture, it looks like there's another wheel in the car. You know those like driver's ed cars or whatever that have like a brake in them or something, you know, like
Yeah.
another.
Yeah.
It looked like there was like another wheel, like he was just pretending. Of course, they were like driving in a straight line, and he's like,
once you become president, like you're not allowed to drive anymore. You're not allowed to drive on public roads, period. Like even after your presidency, all of that, you're not allowed.
"You're not allowed to ride bikes either." It's like a program. Like Max and I are reading this iRobot book, and these robots have these 3 laws that they have to follow. It's like in their programming. So I think part of the program is you're not allowed to ride a bike. So it's like he gets on and he's like, bonk. Just has to follow.
What are the 3 laws in iRobot that the robots have to follow?
Oh man, I should get Max to tell you. Like we had a friend over the other day. Someone who
Yeah,
has
no,
tech
you know
tutor.
what? Don't tell. Yeah, just go grab him.
Well, he's not in here. He's
No,
in the
yeah,
office.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, you mean go home?
FaceTime him in.
Okay.
Get Max.
Hold on, let me have him
Come
drive
back.
over here on his ATV.
Just tell him it's episode 100, man.
He actually he was
Um,
describing it on the on that video that I was telling you about, Cam. Like
Yeah, Drake said that Katie posted a video of him talking about robots and stuff.
yeah, and he starts describing some of the laws or the rules that the robots have to follow. And he's like, well, this robot's breaking some of the rules.
What?
No, it's
How?
amazing because like when I first so we started reading iRobot, right, which is Isaac Asimov. They made a movie based on it. You know, it's one of those things where that's just a Hollywood version. The book is like, I mean, there's like a whole series he wrote about robots, and they're really good. I had never read them before. They're actually him, the author, exploring what would it be like to have robots that are relatively self-aware and like, you know, humanoid and so forth. And they would have to follow these laws. And then what would be the psychological and philosophical consequences? What would be the pitfalls? It's like him exploring all of that, like doing the work of actually like testing it out and thinking about it. And like in the book, it's like in the iRobot book, it's all these like short stories, but they're told as a story of a woman like recollecting her time as a psychologist working for a robot company. And like she understands the mind of the robots because obviously they have a psychology based on their programming. And so she it's cool because every story is like something going wrong with one of the robots, some particular thing. As they develop their robotics and advance them, there's something that goes wrong, and then she has to come in, or somebody has to come in and figure out what's the issue, why is that being caused from the three laws, like what is the solution and so forth. And it's really cool because as I'm reading these with Max, I'm like, this is fucking training him to think like a scientist, like straight up. Like it, I mean, they design experiments in the book and then they test them and they show how they fail and they have to redesign it. And it's not overly technical, but it's not dumbed down. Like it's really good. Yeah.
That book is not training him to think like a scientist. Scientists today, they just agree with whatever the money tells them to. Okay. So clearly that's like the old school science. I don't know, but
Sounds
well,
like
here's the thing. People have defined scientist equals I have a job as a scientist. But that's not what a scientist, I mean, I know you're being facetious, but that's not what a scientist is. Like anybody can be a scientist. It's not a job that you have. Just because you have a degree in science, you're not a scientist. You could have a fucking PhD in science. You're not a scientist necessarily.
Watch this be the episode that gets fact checked and deplatformed.
Actually, if you have a degree in science, you technically are a scientist.
Yeah, but then they take like Heather and Brett Weinstein and they cancel those people, even though they're biologists, but they're not allowed to have opinion on biology. So it's not about, so anyways, but it's really cool, these books, because
they're like, wait. How are you guys allowed to weigh in? Are you guys biologists? They're like, yes. Oh shit, we gotta remove that title from you guys. Okay, got it.
Yeah, you don't have to be a biologist to be a biologist. Okay. You can just identify as I mean, if you can identify, if a man can identify as check this out, guys. Here's the subtle point. Here's the trick. Okay. Man, woman, male, female equals, see, there's sex and there's gender. Do you see? Are girls female?
Yes.
Are women female?
Yes.
Are there female pigs?
Yes.
Are there woman pigs?
Whoa.
Ooh.
What do you call, like, okay, here, let me back up.
Wow. Okay.
A female is in the context of humans, is the XX chromosome version of a human.
Sex.
A woman is the adult version of that.
Right.
You got it? It's not you are a woman and then you're a female and there's two separate things. A girl is a female, a woman is a female. They're both females. Woman is the mature version of the human female.
Okay, I got it.
Gender is a construct that was created, that was made up, that's called identity, which is a mental fucking disorder. Because if you're identifying with something that's not physically what you are, you have a mental disorder. There we go. See, it takes a father. It takes a man to say that.
I was gonna say a couple things. One, back to the scientist point. If you build a business, you're pretty much like a scientist. right?
Obviously, you have to use
Okay.
scientific thinking
Yeah.
to problem solve and
Yeah.
test things. And
That might go over the heads of a bunch of people.
it's like science is not it's not chemistry. I mean, just think about the word
Right.
science, and then when you have science, you have images. That's not science. You can have a science of cooking, and it's not the guy in the laboratory. It's just looking at things from the perspective of creating a hypothesis, testing, modifying the experiment. It's experimenting and using physical feedback, measurable results as a means to improve the thing that you're trying to do and the result, or to understand the physical reality of what you're doing. That's science. It's not anything else. So anytime science goes outside of that, it has lost its it's lost its right to call itself science. If you're just developing a drug, and I mean, just recently, there was this woman, I was watching an interview with her, and she has all these issues from the sheep's milk. You know, I like this guy, Tony Lin. Have you seen Tony Lin? I seen y'all some of his videos.
Yeah,
He holds up this hanger with nothing
Yeah.
on it, and he goes, "The emperor's new clothes." He's like this Asian guy, right? So he's always like, and when the people took the emperor's new clothes, and he like this, like, I don't know if he's purposely doing this like really stereotypical Asian accent, or if he's like, that's just the way he talks.
I think that's just the way he talks.
It's either that, but I think he's like overdoing it. You know what I mean?
I think he
It's like
is,
funny. It's funny actually, but it's like also, he goes, okay, before we start this video, we have to make a YouTube algorithm very happy. So the COVID-19 vaccine is 100% very effective. And then he's like, extremely effective. And he's like, just like these emperor new clothes. And you're like, so every time he refers to it as the vaccine, he just says the emperor's new clothes. And anyways, he was showing this video of this interview this woman did with a doctor. I don't know if this Tony Lin guy's a doctor or not, but he was showing an interview with this doctor. And she is like massively suffering all these side effects. Like she had to retrain herself how to walk because her muscles and like everything neurologically was fucked, right? And she was part of the, I don't know if it was Pfizer per se. I'm not sure which vaccine, but it was I think it was Pfizer, part of the like the trials. The trials. And they were showing her story and her explanation of everything. And then they were showing what they reported as the results of the trial. And there was 3 people that had like similar outcomes as her. And so there was only 3 people that she, because they don't say the names. So she can't say, see, they're lying about me. That's me. But there's 3 of them that had the same experience as her. And they're saying that all of them within there's like 2 or 4 weeks. Within 2 weeks, their symptoms were alleviated and they're fine. And she was like, yeah, because they were giving me something called
some sort of steroid.
It was like IVG
IGF
or something,
or
IGV or something like that.
Yeah.
It was some steroid or something to help with their symptoms. And so, and she was like, yeah, 2 weeks I was feeling better because I was on this, but then the treatment runs its course and then the symptoms come back. And the doctor she was talking to was like, yeah, every doctor would know that these steroids have a course where after 2 weeks, it's going to wear off. Your symptoms are going to return. They should have been following up with you after that. And she goes, well, no, they were following up with us after that. So they know that I'm still having the experiences, but they just decided to stop the trial or stop the reporting and be like, up and here. So it's like, they're literally just choosing to report the good news. And then, and then who's going to even know? And then and then even watching the video, someone's like, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. You're just looking for stuff. It's like, no, that's the actual fucking, there was only one study done to prove that they were okay or whatever. So if you even go into the one thing and show there's like flaws in the one thing, you can show it's all a fucking scam. Why was I bringing that up? Oh, because of the science point. So it's like, you can't, if you work for that company, you're doing that, so you can't call yourself a scientist because you're not doing it from the starting point of actual figuring out what the issue is. Like, how can we improve
evaluation? Yeah. Without the, hypothesis bias.
You want to get us canceled? Here's what I think. This whole thing was designed to put people into a state of fear so they would buy into all of this so that those who are behind this can test experimental or mRNA on the population. Meaning it's not about the virus, it's about they want to be able to fucking change your DNA. So
And
what
now,
we'll start to
why would
see,
they? Why would they want to do that?
because they want to be able to sell you shit that changes your DNA. So they had to first test it. They were never going to get approval to do human testing on people. It's against the Nuremberg Code, right? But if it's an emergency and you have emergency youth authorization and all this stuff, but they even lied in all the shit they did to get the emergency youth authorization or all whatever. You see what I'm saying? So it's just all a big fucking like, right? So that's not science. That's not you actually have the best interest. Scientists should be people who, look, I'm not saying they can't do things to make money, but they should not be making money from the science. Does that make sense? This is the problem. This is why we need to have basic income. We need to have a basic income so that someone who wants to be a science, and they can get the resources that they need to do their science, but they would have all of their survival taken care of.
Well, actually,
Like, and do you think that do you think a real scientist gives a fuck about luxury? Like, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have a nice lifestyle. They should have enough to have a good lifestyle. And if they're doing a job, they should have more than just the basic income. They can get paid as a job if they were doing that, but they don't need to. Do you know that the FDA, these people get royalties from all this stuff that they create?
it's
That they approve?
And
I'm sorry. Yeah, the NIH rather.
Yeah.
They get royalties from all this stuff that they approve.
Hey, Kim, you're
Not
saying
all of
this,
it, but some of it.
You're saying all this stuff about science, but did you know that Dr. Fauci is science? He declared it on CNN. I heard him.
Like, imagine I've been reading also, in addition to Asimov, I've been reading Philip K. Dick. Do you guys know Philip K. Dick? I don't know if I mentioned this on the previous
A little
podcast.
bit.
Yeah.
I think I talked about one of his books recently. What?
I made a joke before that his middle name should have been this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that. It was a memorable joke.
Yeah.
There was a book I was reading called Penultimate Truth that was about a world where there was a nuclear war. Everybody went underground except these elite people who were like, they were in the military and they were there to sort of like keep fighting or whatever. But then after the war stopped, they were like, hey, why the fuck should we tell everybody? Let's just steal the earth and keep it. And they had like one dude would own like Utah. That would be his estate. You know, like it was this whole conspiracy. And they had this person called the Protector, who was a robot who they could feed scripts to. It was like an AI, and he would deliver speeches to the people underground. And they thought that their Protector was like, oh, telling you about the war effort and all this stuff. And they had to stay. It's just a little bit longer kind of thing, right? And then they find out, the whole thing. And then I'm reading a book now called.
What happens at the end of that?
Well, I don't want to
No.
spoil it.
Don't spoil.
Oh,
That just reminded me of when it's like the lockdowns. They're like, we need you to just lock down a little bit more. Come on, we're in this together. It's like the exact same thing.
That's what I'm saying. So that you can fucking disrupt the supply chains, fuck everybody over, kill the small businesses, so that you can steal the fucking resources and everything. So you can steal everything. It's just a theft. That's all it is.
So fucking obvious.
It's so fucking obvious. And then convince everybody of like, oh, you know what? Capitalism, actually, you don't even need that. Here's the thing. Yes, you can sit here and be like, capitalism is fucked. It's fucked everybody. It's fucked the earth. It's got us to this point. I understand that. But that's not because of capitalism. That's because of human nature. So what needs to change? Capitalism into socialism? Has human nature changed?
No.
Would you rather live in socialism and communism with human nature as it is? Because all the shit that people are afraid of like a dictatorship and all that stuff, that's what's going to happen, because people are still looking for dictators. If you believe in God, you believe in a dictator. By definition, that's not even controversial. That's like, just own it. I mean, think about it. Like,
but Cameron, he's a loving dictator who knows me.
Right. It's like, no, but he's the protector. He knows the truth about everything, and he just has to give us what we need to know. And I'm like, are you literally just telling me the plot of The Penultimate Truth by Philip K. Dick? Or are you talking about your religion? It's not totally clear to me. Which is it? No, he's the Lord and the protector. Yeah, they call him the protector in the book. He's like my brother, like a big brother to me. It's like, what the fuck, man?
What's funny about that is like those, we have like a dictatorship by democracy. Like
Wow.
Like we all agree essentially to a dictatorship. We're all participating in it because, and it's really just like the voting is just not taking responsibility for your own life, or for as much as you
the
possibly
voting isn't even the democracy. Think about it. That's the false illusion.
No, I'm saying not the like you casting a ballot. I'm saying the actual vote that you're making is by you not taking responsibility.
Oh,
in your
sorry,
own
yeah.
life.
Yeah,
That's the
exactly.
actual-
Like every action you're doing, the way you spend your money, the way you do everything every day, the moment to moment stuff is you voting.
Yeah.
Every moment to moment. And
Yeah.
that's why, again, human nature has to change. It's not going to be you change the economic system only. I mean, there are things we can change that will start to alleviate survival pressure so that people will have the time to change their nature. And if somebody says like, oh, you can't change your nature, it's like then
They need to see a TT presentation. Damn.
that's like the perfect, it's like that's the perfect expression of abdication of self-responsibility.
Mhm.
It's like, well, I just am who I am. And it's like, okay, I think we're talking about this on another call. But remember we were talking about the reason why, I think it was on the podcast, like the reason why people believe in God is because they can't see all of the X, Y, and Z, all the dots. So they're like, well, I can't even begin to even understand that there is something behind this. So there must be some magical thing
Mhm.
that is doing it, that takes care of it or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So what was the point I was saying right before that?
What about human nature and how?
Oh, right. Just because you can't understand all of the details behind how it works and how it was formed specifically. Like I just am who I am. Like Drake, before we started recording, you were talking about Max, that video that Katie posted,
Oh yeah.
and you were saying like his expression, his personality, and so forth,
He's
right?
so charismatic. So fucking charismatic.
And I'm not saying that he's not more than I am, but it's like, do you think he's just getting that out of fucking nowhere? Like this just who he is.
Hmm.
And it's like, I mean, I actually explained to him how humor works. And I'm constantly telling jokes to him. So like you'll see, and I'm not saying he can't go beyond me because he's got more of a obviously time and the effective vocabulary from TechnoTutor and so forth than I had. But my point being that it's not, so I'm not also not saying it's only coming from me or Katie either. It's not. Like Katie, we were just talking about this yesterday. She was like, it's incredible. It even still blows our minds how effective the fundamental difference because of TechnoTutor. Like it's not something we could even have gotten close to. I was going to tell you guys this story. Yesterday, I took Max and Seneca into town to go to lunch. And then afterwards, we went to the little town square where there's like usually some kind of like little booths with people selling stuff. And this one guy was selling honey. And he had his son there with him and sitting in a chair looking on his phone. And the son must have been 13, 14, something like that. I'm not really sure. And the kid was just sitting there on the phone. The dad was behind the counter, right? And we went up there because I was like, hey, maybe we'll buy some honey or something, right? So the kids are looking at everything. And Seneca's looking at the honey and stuff. And I'm talking to her. And Max is just talking to the guy. He goes, hey, can I ask you a question? The guy's like, yeah. He goes, do you know about school? And the guy's like, yeah. Actually, we have our kids are homeschooled. And Max is like, oh yeah, I don't go to school. He goes like, do you know what the problem with school is? And the guy's like, what? And he goes, it's just a waste of time. And then the guy's like, well, I mean, no, I don't think it's a waste of time. I think you need to have an education. And Max was like, yeah, the thing about school is they don't actually teach you anything. And the guy's like, well, no, I mean, that's not true. I'm sure, your father, he teaches you a lot. And it was so weird because the guy had just told Max that he homeschooled his kids.
Yeah.
And so of course you would think this guy's going to be like, yeah, school's bullshit, right? And then the guy even said like, oh, do you guys homeschool? And I said, no, we don't homeschool. But we do everything at home. And he goes, oh, like, so you like unschool? I said, no, we don't do unschooling really. We just focus on building a vocabulary and teaching them to read. That's what we do. And he was like, oh, but I'm trying to let Max talk to him, right? And so I'm kind of putting the conversation back to Max, and Max is like, because Max really wants to sell this guy. And he's like, really wants to sell him first on school is not an option, right? And so the guy, it's so weird because the guy's like arguing with him that he won't agree with Max that school is a waste of time. But every argument he's making about it is like, yeah, but your parents, they teach you things. It's like every argument he's making has nothing to do with school. So I'm listening to this and like Max is not really picking up on that part yet. That doesn't make sense what the guy's saying because it just seems like he's arguing with Max because he's not just agreeing like, okay, yeah, school's bullshit. Let's get to the next point, right? It's like the guy wants to be stuck on that point. And I'm there, but I don't want to, because obviously I could start selling the guy, but I want Max to develop this point. So I'm kind of like talking to Max. Obviously the guy can hear me, but supporting Max to then open the point up, right? And I said, Max, it sounds like he's not yet in agreement with you about school, which is weird. I said, ask him if he has any kids that went to school. And so Max asked him, and the guy said, oh yeah, well, I was in the military and we lived in Germany or whatever, and you're not allowed to homeschool there. So we did have 2 kids in school and there wasn't anything we could do to whatever. And I said, see, Max, I said, so he actually had kids that went to school. So do you think it's possible that he might be reacting to that because he didn't have a choice? And so he's reacting to that point perhaps. And Max was like, oh, okay. And it was, as soon as I said that, the guy totally shifted. It was like he wasn't arguing with Max anymore. And then like Max is like, ask me an algebra question. And the guy says something like, I forget what the guy said, but Max was like, no, like a real algebra question. And I said to him, I go, what's x, if x minus 3 equals 5, what's x? And Max looks at it and he goes, x would be 7. No, wait, no, that was a mistake. No, x would be 8. X would be 8. The guy's like, you can see him go like, what the? And then like the kids had picked out like a little bag, this woven bag, and Seneca wanted one. And Max just randomly goes, okay, Cam, we want to get these 2 bags. So you're going to need $6 because they're each $3. And then the guy was like, right. And then at a certain point, like they're continuing to talk, right. And then the guy's like, he keeps talking to me. He's like not really he's not really talking with Max. It's more like you'll see this pattern with adults when they talk to kids, especially as you guys have kids and they start to develop this point, the adults don't know how to communicate with them. Like they're not talking like they would talk to you, even though they could, like Max could handle that conversation. So it's kind of like they're just saying a thing at the kid, not really fully listening to what they're saying, but then trying to talk to me. Right. And the guy said to him, he kept saying like, wow, you guys are doing a really good job. Like referring to like, I guess, educating Max or whatever. Cause he's like talking, cause he's listening to Max talk. And there's one point where he says to Max, he goes, you're really well-spoken for your age. Right. And Max never told him how old he was. And I go, Max, tell him or ask him how old he thinks you are. So Max asked him, right. And the guy goes, how old do you think I am? And Max goes, or the guy goes, I don't know, like, maybe like 11. And Max is taller for his age. I mean, but Max goes, oh, super wrong. I'm 5. The guy goes, 5? It's like, you're 5? And he looks at me and he goes, you guys are doing a great job. And it was funny because at one point, like the son was over at the it's like in a chair. And he was like, and there was definitely something off about the kid. And he was like holding a phone up to his ear, trying to like listen to something. And Max looks over and he starts laughing really hard. And he goes, look, your son's holding his phone to his ear. Why is he doing that? He shouldn't do that. Right. And it was funny because later when we were talking, we went to the playground and I was asking Max what he thought about it. And he was like, that kid didn't seem very intelligent. He was like holding his phone up to his ear. And I was like, how do you think that kid? He was like, I don't know. Like, and I was like, he was probably like 13 or something. Like he was an older kid. I was like, do you see the difference? And that guy thought you were 11. And he's like, well, why did he think I looked 11? I said, no, he didn't think you looked 11. Like based on how you were speaking with him and what you knew from his perspective, that's what he thinks an 11-year-old should be like. Right. And so it was just so fascinating because then we went to the playground and then there just happened to be 2 5-year-olds there. Okay. And I hear the boy and he's going like, I won't play baseball with the baseball bat. Can I play baseball, daddy? And like Max is like asking this kid, hey, do you want to play? Like, how old are you? And the kid's like, I'm 5 years old. And I'm like, holy. And the grandpa or whoever is like, how old are you? And he's like, I'm 5. And it's like people just cannot process it. I mean, the kid talked like he had the same sort of like childlike lisp as like Seneca still kind of has, but he didn't even have the vocabulary of Seneca. It's like Seneca still sounds like a little kid, but when you talk to her, like it's amazing. Like she'll come over to the barn, like, and she'll be like, "Hey, Cameron, can you come over to the barn, or can you come over to the house right now? I would like you to cut a watermelon for me." Like that's how she speaks to me, you know? And I'm like, "Oh, well, why didn't you ask Katie?" She's like, "Katie's sleeping with Caius right now, so I'm coming to ask you." But when she says, it still kind of has that childlike sound to it, but that's the words that she's using. And she's 3.5, right? And, you know, it's like, we talk a lot about the parenting part, and that's super important. But even if you do all of that really well, which you can't really if you don't have Technotutor as the parent, because you're just fucking up your child with all your retarded ideas and stuff. But even if you could do that part right, if they're not using Technotutor, their vocabulary is not going to develop like our kids is. Like there's nothing to explain it otherwise. And it's not even like I'm trying to say like, well, I've just rolled out all the other options. Like you see the direct result.
Yeah.
Like with Seneca, every time I pick up a book, she immediately, like whatever level book I'm reading, she's like starts pointing out, why does it say that word? Why does it say that word? Why does it say that word? She'll read the chapter. Like we were reading Isaac Asimov. She said, why does it say little lost robot? And I'm like, well, that's the title of the chapter. And it's kind of giving us an idea of maybe what the story's about. We're going to find out what it's about. She's like, okay. And then she'll be like, why does it say that? And then every day, basically every day, she comes to me and she goes, Cameron, I learned the word electric today, or, you know, whatever the word is. Like she'll like, as I'm carrying her around, she's like, I learned this word and I know this word now and I know this word. And she's like telling me the words. You know, and like we put up an electric fence for our like a little netting for our goats so they could like graze and we can move them around. And that morning, Sydney had done electric, shock, fence, I don't know, some other words as well. And she was telling me about it. So that way they could understand the fence and not have to get shocked by it like I fucking did. You know, by the way, I know what 11,000 volts feels like. It doesn't feel good. Yeah. So, but you see my point though, it's just like,
I'm curious.
I mean, have you ever been shocked before?
Yeah.
Never by that
It's
much.
just like that, just really intense. It's just really intense. Yeah. But I was getting shocked by the battery at the terminal because I had like the jumper cables and like the dogs had chewed on the wires and I had repaired it. But there was one part where I didn't know the wires were sticking out near the jumper cable,
Yeah.
or near like the clip, I mean.
Yeah.
And so like when I picked it up, it was like, and it just feels like someone's taking your muscles and going like that really quick. You know what I mean? It's just like, fuck. And I was like, fuck. So yeah, it wasn't fun.
It's hilarious.
But it was funny because I had told Seneca like what it would be like so that she wouldn't touch it. And I was like, let me give you an example of what I would do if I touched it. And I was like, oh, like I made this really exaggerated, like, and she was like, oh. But then when it actually happened, it wasn't even that. It was just like, oh, fuck, what the fuck? Like, because at first you're like, what happened? You know? It's like, but then afterwards it's like over. You know what I mean? It's like a pain that's just momentary. And the only thing that happens, like, it was kind of sore in my arm afterwards because it was just like your muscles were like, you know, like that.
Fast
Wow.
twitch.
If you would have accidentally hit both of your hands, would it have gone through your heart?
Well, it doesn't matter if you take both your hands because your feet are on the ground. So it's going through your body regardless.
Okay.
What if you have rubber soles?
Well, then it may not. It might not.
Your
Yeah, if you're not grounded, yeah. If you're not using your Technotutor, then maybe.
You probably die. So okay, so this is fascinating, right? We're talking about human nature and how so many people have this bullshit idea that human nature can't change. And then I was hearing you share that story about Max and Seneca just being so obviously unlike anything we've ever seen with kids before. And I remember there's, you know, the guy Robert Greene who wrote the book 48 Laws of Power and all those other books. He came out with a book recently called The Laws of Human Nature. And I haven't read the book yet, but I was like, what a stupid idea. Because I'm looking at some of these laws and it's like so obviously not a law. This guy's just explaining the limitations of his own mind. Such as like law 12, people are bad at long-term thinking. So like
Yeah, like Bill Gates.
According to
Terrible.
what? Yeah. People have attitudes. People want the wrong things. People want what they don't have. People want to avoid thinking about death. It's just like so many stupid things, but people will look at someone like Robert Greene and be like, oh, he's such a good author. And wow, 48 Laws of Power, just such a monumental work and
They can't
literary.
read with discernment.
Right, right.
Even when
And
someone
so
says like use
slowed
discernment
down.
when you read, it's like you can't just use discernment. You can't. It's like that's like if I said use your muscles and you have no muscles. Like you don't have them. You're not able to exercise them.
Bring up that point that you were talking about before the podcast about like the reading, like specifically about you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's an audio series from Bernard Pullman called History of Destiny, and like in part 4, he doesn't call it techno tutor, but he's going into how he started developing his interest in education and developing technology to support with education. And so he started within mathematics, and he was talking about when he was young, like 18, he was diagnosed with a reading issue. And so he got really specific support with that at these reading centers, and it helped him. And he said to the degree that it helped him, it changed his life, because suddenly he was more able to read with, he didn't use the word discernment. It was like, because he was reading without the emotional bias and without his preconceived ideas of what the words meant. He was more, because he was developing his vocabulary and his reading ability, he was able to then read objectively what was being said and then evaluate it and see, is this practically possible? An example of this would be someone who reads the Bible and just says, all right, it's the word of God, so this is what it is. And they don't even look at the physical effect of how they live based on what they read. It's like, you could read something that tells you this is something that you should live by, a principle, but then you're not even able to see, are you able to run an experiment in your mind, even not even in physical reality, in your mind, to see, how would this play out? Like, how would this actually work? You don't necessarily have to do it in physical reality. It's always good to do that, to actually test it. But the problem is, you don't want to test like jumping off a cliff in physical reality, do you? Could you, in your mind, if you understood the laws of gravity, if you understood your weight, if you understood the wind resistance and all these other factors, if you understood those principles, could you be like, it's not a good idea to do it?
Wait,
people say like, what if I wasn't afraid? I have to have fear, because if I wasn't afraid of jumping off a cliff, I would just jump off of it. I'm like, okay, I'm not afraid of putting a gun to my head, but I'm not going to do it because I understand that's not a safe thing to do. Like, but I'm not afraid of it. Like if someone put a gun to my head and they were like, I'm going to pull a trigger, I'm sure I would experience fear. What I'm saying is I'm not using fear of that to make myself not do it. I'm using common sense. I'm going to practice effective, like safe practices with a gun.
I'm not afraid of putting my hand on the stove, but I'm not going to do it. Like,
nope. You got to touch the stove once to know about it. Like you don't, you could explain to the person why it doesn't make sense to do it. They may not understand and they may still do it and then learn from that, and they may be part of the process, unfortunately, but that's not 100% necessarily. You see what I mean? Like, so, but going back to the reading point, when Bernard explained that, it's like, then you're able to read and evaluate things without the bias. And this is the problem. People are like this whole "what is a woman" thing we've been joking about a lot, right? That they're making this documentary and it's like a big topic right now, and like not knowing if you're a man or a woman. Parents are just taking in all this information and they're not even able to objectively evaluate it. And then there's the emotion, because as soon as you get to the point of asking the objective questions, they say, look, the suicide rates for these people are really high if they don't get gender affirming care. Do you want a dead child? Is that what you want? Like, I know do you want your daughter to die, or do you want a boy who's alive?
Oh,
and it's like, oh, well, I'll have a son that's alive. That's much better than a dead daughter. I'm like,
wait. I just saw something. Okay. So the reason why people would take in all this information and just go like, oh yeah, that's what I have to do. Like they'll go along with whatever's being said in the media. In other words, the reason why is because everything that they've learned in every way that they've learned has come from that. Like, literally, it's never come from themselves. Right. Like with what you're doing with Max and Seneca, is like the learning is coming from them. it's coming from their ability to like, oh, I can put this together, I can read this, I can understand this, and then they go and experiment with things, and like that's science, right? But like with most people, and especially today, but for most people, they've been told by an adult, this is what it is, some authority figure, this is how you should behave, this is what you should think, all those sorts of things. And then today, especially, it's mostly from watching the television, where they watch like Dora, or they watch, I don't fucking know, Barney. I don't even know if Barney still exists, but you get what I'm saying. Like they watch these programs, and this is how they quote unquote learn things. And then they're like, oh, mommy, I was watching Sesame Street, and they said that boys don't always have to be boys. And they said that unicorns are also a real thing. And they said like all this shit. And it's like, and that's what they believe. And they're just taking a consensus of like, yep, this is just what everyone else agrees with. So that's what is true. That is what I should
That's
think.
what you were expected to do in school.
Exactly.
Just, okay, we agree with it, even if it's wrong or whatever. One of the points he makes in that video is when he started looking at school and how it functions, and he noticed that the stuff you remember from school, actually, it was funny because we were talking to the person who was giving Max and I a haircut the other day, and he was telling her about school, and she was like saying, well, you do have to go to school because you need to learn stuff, right? And I go, well, let me ask you a question. I said, do you remember do you remember what you learned in school? And she was like, yeah, I remember it. And I'm like, really? Okay. So like, you remember like algebra? And she's like, yeah, I remember algebra. And I'm like, okay, so if I give you an algebraic equation right now, you could solve it? She goes, no, I don't think I could do that. But I wasn't interested in math. And I was like, oh, what were you interested in? She was like, history. Like, I like stuff like that. I'm like, okay. So like, what was some of the causes of the French Revolution? And she was like, well, I don't remember that. I mean, I'm like, so what do you remember? And here you are cutting me and my son's hair, and you're acting like school was valuable to you. What's interesting is she did have to go to school to cut hair, but at that school, they actually teach you practical stuff. They show you how to do it. You have to do it, and you have to show them you can do it to get to graduate. That's not what we do in school. In school, sometimes like, do you guys ever have this thing where you like wake up and you're like already thinking about something? It's like you're in that alpha state, and you're like
every day of my life.
Alpha, like, you know what I mean? Like where you're just like, you're waking up and you're like in this deep thought. And I had this realization when I was waking up of like, I'll come back to it because I want to explain this first. I want to explain this other part first.
Okay.
What Bernard was explaining in the video was the stuff that you learn in school, the stuff that you remember, is always the stuff that you took to the level of like rote memorization. Not saying that it's because of the method itself. It's just that you took it to that level where it's like you fucking ingrained it. Mm-hmm. Like people, like, remember when they made you do your times tables and stuff like that? And nowadays they don't even necessarily do that. I don't know anymore what they do at school. Right. But at a certain point, it's like people are like, well, when I was in school, we learned our timetables. Yeah, because they fucking forced you to do it. And I'm not saying it's the best way, but it is a way to get it ingrained. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's just like your name. It's like it's ingrained into the rote point. The problem is the methodology through which it's done is so slow. How much effort do you have to spend just to ingrain the times tables, multiplication tables? You can't even, how little are you able to get in the time frame where your natural learning ability is open if you're using that method? It's actually extremely slow. It seems effective. But then when you look at the percentage of things you remember from school, because how long did it take you to do the multiplication table? Okay, how are you going to do that with advanced calculus? Yeah. So unless your vocabulary is developed to the point where you can easily absorb the patterns being shown to you and they just become like obvious to you, which means they become long-term, it can only be done through memorizing, short-term memorizing. And so the thing is, if I just tell you, oh, this is the point I was going to get to. The way school is conducted is I'm going to give you a bunch of information and you memorize that information and then you just repeat it to me. Okay. But that's not the same thing as knowing how to do it. That's just, and here's the deeper point. That's just memorizing the ability to talk about it. Like, for example, I could give any of you guys a script from quantum mechanics and you can memorize the words verbatim. Would you agree with me? Like it might take you some time, and different people have different abilities, they're quicker or slower, but you could take a paragraph and you could memorize it by heart. And if there was no pressure, you could like read the paper from memory potentially, right? And some people would have a lot of trouble with that, but some people can do that, right? Like, and it's not even that crazy. Like if you just practiced it, right? It's like reading a script in a play. Okay. But you don't understand any of that. And so most of the stuff that you learned in school was you memorizing the script of talking about it. But that's not the same thing as understanding it and being able to really use it and apply it. And like, what's the value of calculus, for example? Right? Is like, if you were a computer game designer or a computer programmer and you're trying to solve some problem and you're like, oh, I need to figure out how to create a 3D printer that can create the surface of this mouse. Well, how do I tell the computer the surface shape? I have to give it some kind of something in numbers. And if you understand calculus, you understand something called gradients, and you understand how you can give calculus equations to describe the surface of this mouse and where the boundaries are. Like literally calculus, it's advanced calculus, is what they would use to design the way in which a 3D printer understands surfaces and then knows how to print them. And there's a lot more that goes into it. But if you were to study calculus, go back to what you learned in school or should have learned, you're like, oh, fuck, this is what they were talking about. But they would have never explained it to you like that. And then even the degree to which they might have, it would just be like in a real one little, like you got a 3D printer at school and you do one little quick experiment and that was it. You're not like spending the whole time doing it. You know what I mean? Like really going into it, really understanding it. And why does everyone need to learn calculus at that specific moment in time? If your natural learning ability remains open and you have a high vocabulary, couldn't you learn it whenever you need it?
Yeah.
And if you got a lot of time and there's certain basic things that would make sense to know at some point, it makes sense as a child to learn all of it. I'm not saying we need to delay that. But my point is, why do you need to learn it at that specific moment in time? Do you know what I mean? And so like Max the other day, he has this graphing calculator. It's a TI-89. And it's like the one I would have used in calculus, right? And he was like, we were going to go play, with, like me and him and Seneca. And he was like, I'm going to bring my graphing calculator because we're probably going to need to do some calculus because I think we're going to need to calculate and figure out, it was like some game he wanted to do and like figure out where certain things are going to be. And like, because of some video he had been watching where they use a story to explain why you use calculus and so forth, right? And so like last night, it was probably like 10 o'clock at night and he's got his graphing calculator. We're on the couch and we're typing in polynomial equations and trying to figure out what their roots are. And using like the different apps on the calculator and looking at it and everything, I'm explaining to him what those are. Oh God, I'm just so glad I remember this. And then, okay, so there's this function on the calculator where you type in the coefficients of the polynomial expression. Okay, like you guys might remember this from school, like x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 0. You remember something like that, right?
Yeah.
And you can figure out through certain methods what values of x would make that true. Like I'll give you an easier example.
No, that
x plus
easy.
x plus 3 equals 6. What is x?
Negative. Well, it's 3. X plus 3 is
3, right?
6, yeah.
So if you put 3 plus 3 is 6, that makes sense, right? So if I give you x squared plus 4 equals 0, let me give it an easier one. X squared minus 4 equals 0. How about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What would x have to be so that x squared is 4?
2 or negative
2.
2 or negative 2, right? Because either of those, if you square it and you subtract 4, you get 0. Okay, simple, right? So then you can make it more complex. Say x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 0.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you could think about it, and there's also methods to easily come to the answer, right? The answer would be
3.
what? 3, right? Because 3 squared. Is that right?
9. Yeah. X squared plus 6x plus 9.
It's negative
0.
3,
It's
right?
negative 3. Sorry.
Negative 3, yeah. I was like, that doesn't seem right. Negative 3. Because if you square negative 3, you get 9. Add it to the 9, you get 18. And if you multiply negative 3 times 6, you get negative 18. They cancel out, you get 0. Okay, simple. If you understand the methods of how to do it, you can come to the answer very quickly. If you had to think about it, it probably takes a while. I just happen to know how to think about it, right? See, but I can do that in my head, right? And Drake can. Like we can be like, okay, I know. It's like you can do that. It's not because we're geniuses, because we learned how to think about it and what those things mean. Okay, and we're geniuses. Yeah, this is a coincidence. Okay, so this will make sense to Drake completely. Some people might be like, not totally understand the significance of this. Okay. So we're on this, it's like an app on the TI. It's not like a phone app. It's just, it has its own little applications. And I never used those. I just used the functions. And so this one, it's like there was an app for polynomials. And so that equation I gave was an example of a polynomial. And it solves the roots meaning those, what is X? What is the value of X to make it true? Okay. But you have to give it the coefficients. So like in that case, X squared, the coefficient is 1 because it's 1X squared. And the 6X is 6 and the 9 is 9. So you have 3 coefficients, right? So you give the calculator these coefficients, you tell it the degree, meaning the highest power it goes up to, in this case, X squared. And then it'll tell you what X should be, okay? I don't know what, maybe there was some value stored in the calculator, or I'm not sure. But when we put in those coefficients, it told us, it said root 1 and root 2. It said a non-real for both, okay? And that doesn't make sense, right, Drake? I'm like, so then we went out, I used a different function to solve it, just a solver, and it said -3. And I'm like, okay, it's definitely -3. And I kind of had a headache last night, and I'm not sure why. I think it was like something I ate, but it's funny because Max was aware of that. And I was like, no, Max, this doesn't make sense. Like they shouldn't be non-real. And he goes, Cameron, I think your headache is making you like not be able to think properly or something. It's doing something with your brain, right? He's like saying it just like that. It was so funny. But what was so interesting is we're looking at it, and when it says non-real, I didn't say anything. I just was saying this isn't right. I wasn't explaining why. I was just like, because I was trying to think of it. What's going on here? Why is it? Did I make a mistake? Did I put the wrong thing in? And Max goes, well, it's saying that the results are imaginary. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but it shouldn't be, right? And then we solved it and we went back to it and it said non-real again. And I'm like, and I go, wait, Max, I go, why did you say that it said the results are imaginary? It doesn't say that. It says they're non-real. He goes, well, yeah, but non-real is imaginary. Like if they're imaginary numbers, that's non-real result. I'm like, how the fuck do you know that?
That's awesome.
And he's like, and I was like, how did you know that? And he goes, oh, well, I was watching one of those videos on polynomials and they were talking about non-real numbers and imaginary numbers and it's in the same. I'm like, now, like you all studied that in school.
Yeah.
And everybody listening to this studied that in school. And very few people, and I guarantee the people who do remember it, they feel very proud about themselves. Like, oh no, I knew it. I remember what that was. You actually feel proud about it.
I got touched on that in university. I only heard of non-real imaginary numbers in university.
What? Really?
Yeah.
Hold on. That you remember?
No. Like 100%. I'm so certain. The first time
I
saw.
Okay, but that could be because of where you were math track wise, like
because the Canadian school system.
Because the valedictorian of the school doesn't have to study like any kind of level of advanced math whatsoever. Oh, now we know how you got valedictorian. He's like, I'm gonna take basic addition, like senior in high school. Like, wow, this is easy. Straight A's. But like, I mean, this is a perfect example because this is, and the reason I'm saying that is because we don't ever have the kids rote memorize anything. So Max is sitting here, it says non-real. Like the word non-real can be so many different contexts. If it was an average child, how would they know that it's not just talking about like, oh, non-real, like meaning it's like a unicorn, it's not real. Like he understood the context of polynomials. Non-real means imaginary number, which imaginary number, by the way, just means it's the square root of a negative number. That's all it is. Right. Which if you think about it logically, it's kind of like, well, how do you have a square root of a negative number? Right. But the point is he understands that context. And so he immediately recognized, okay, it's imaginary. And like, so we're having this conversation and it's a 5-year-old and he's in there. Like when I'm at home, if I'm at home, like working in like the barn or doing some stuff around the property, whatever I'm doing, usually if they're not with me, they're like on the computer watching all the videos I downloaded for them. And like, they'll be in there, I'll come in there and for like an hour, him and Seneca are just sitting there watching a video on quantum mechanics or whatever, calculus, robotics, 3D printing. They were watching a video about sea turtles the other day, right? And just all these different points. And what's interesting too, is I'll just add this in, Seneca now is doing the same thing Max did when he was her age. She's constantly asking me, what's 3 + 3? And I'll be like, well, what is it? And she'll go, 6. And she'll go, what's 5 + 5? I'm like, what? She goes, 10. Right? She's like constantly doing that now, right? The same thing he did, where it's like no one is telling her, okay, now it's time to practice your math. So when people say, do you homeschool? I say no. When they say, do you unschool? I say no. Because unschooling is the idea that you shouldn't teach anything until they're ready for it. Then I wouldn't put those calculus videos on the computer. I wouldn't have them use their techno tutor. This is beyond all of that shit. This is beyond any concept of school. It's not unschooling, homeschooling, schooling, reschooling, deschooling, free schooling,
G-schooling.
G-schooling, she-schooling. I don't know, whatever the schoolings are. It's beyond all that stuff because all we're doing is using our techno tutor, putting the vocabulary, having conversations with our kids, explaining stuff, playing, having fun, directing them, helping them resolve conflicts, learning how to communicate, doing activities that for most children would be seemingly too complicated for them. I mean, look at this.
Wow.
All those are cut up by her.
Is that one of the Japanese knives?
No, it's just like some Alaskan something or other.
Okay.
As a gift.
That's awesome.
Like
You can
she
just
cut all
see-
those up.
You
I-
can see her, like her structure, like she's so stable. Because I see all these other kids, like the kid I'm sure you saw trying to play baseball, right? Where they're just like, they're like not structured. You can like see it in them and how they move their muscles and their body and everything.
And I was watching her with
so
the knife,
cool.
and she's like holding her fingers back. You know how you curl your fingers in?
Yeah,
She's like holding her fingers back from the knife.
that's
And she's practicing because her hands are so small, right? But she's like looking very carefully not to get it near her fingers, right? And the reason I came in there is because, so I was on the couch. I was like trying to do something. I forget. I was like, somebody was asking me a question, like a distributor or something. So I was sitting on the couch, like trying to focus on that. And then Seneca's like, hey, I cut up that pepper because we had picked some peppers from the garden. And I was like, what? And I go in there and that was what she had been doing. And I look over at Max and he's like, oh, let me have one of those peppers, Seneca. And I look over at him and he's got Katie's mixing bowl, like where she makes like the dough and all that stuff. And he's got like oat milk in there. He's got like vanilla extract a little bit that he put in there, like all kinds of stuff. He's got like watermelon chunks. He wants to put the pepper in there. And then he comes to me with like one of the mixing parts and he goes like, Cameron, I need to mix this and I'd like you to hook it on there. Cause he knows like it's, relatively dangerous to like do all that stuff himself. He needs to like let us support him with it. So he came and asked me to do that part. So like they're in there like doing experiments in the kitchen while that's what he calls it, doing experiments. I'm like, what are you working on? He's like, oh, I'm doing an experiment. So then he mixes all this stuff together and it's got like cucumbers in it, peppers, like all kinds of stuff, right? And then he pours it into a glass and puts a straw in it. And then Seneca's over at the counter and he's like, you should drink it, Seneca. And I'm like, Seneca, that, you don't have to drink that. Like, it's got like peppers and stuff. She looks at me, she goes, I want to drink it. I'm like, well, it might be spicy. She was like, I want to try it. So she like takes a sip and she goes, I don't really like it. And I was like, because I had tried it and I'm like, yeah, I don't really like it. She's like, I don't like it either. Right. So it's like, you're just playing. So we've been doing like normal stuff, but the kids are super advanced. Like the level that they're at, you would think we're like all day doing school, like work, homework, all this shit. We're doing like probably less than an unschooler. I don't know what unschoolers do. Do they even talk to their kids because they don't want to influence them. So I don't even know if they play with their kids.
I think they just let their kids play video games. That's the only influence.
That seems to be the pattern that a lot of unschool parents do. It's like,
can y'all imagine when Max is now starting to like read books on like the economy and advertising and like influence and stuff like that?
He started telling Katie about how he's going to make $1 billion business. And I wasn't there for. She was like telling me all the stuff he was saying, like really advanced shit. And I was like, where did he get that from? She goes, it was that Patrick Bet David video that you downloaded and put on his computer. About like how to create a building. And I had forgotten I'd done that. So he's like watching these videos from Patrick Bet David.
Remember that one, Kim? You showed it like a year ago on one of those distributor calls, I think, where he was like 10 ways to make $1 million or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that specific video, you mean? Yeah, you're saying I should get that one for him?
Yeah, I mean, I was like, wow, I wish I heard this freaking 20 years ago. So like,
okay, yeah, I'll get that one. That's good.
Man, and I'm just thinking of all these different things, right? How to win friends and influence people, stuff about building culture and teams. Like, Oh my goodness.
He's now at
that's
an
so good.
age, because like the reason I held back on some of that stuff is because a lot of it's like they talk about God and shit. There's like a bunch of bullshit in it. So I wanted him to get to a level where he can use the discernment. So when he hears something that doesn't make sense, he's not just influenced by it, which is the whole point, that going back to that video we were talking about with Bernard, that he was saying, because to get to the point, he said he realized what he realized, the fundamental underlying issue that allows a person who can effectively read to be able to evaluate information objectively and not be unduly influenced by it. And he realized if we could give that to children, as many children as possible, this is the beginning of how you can start to influence society in the way that's best, because you're giving children the ability to stop being just influenced by random shit. So, but again, this is my point. I didn't just give him the Patrick Bet David. I didn't just give him the other stuff. My goal was get him to a point where he can use discernment and he can actually evaluate information and understand. Oh man, that reminds me. We went to a Hobby Lobby the other day to get some stuff. And when we're checking out, right, Max talks to everybody. I mean, he has no fear about talking to anybody. The girl behind the counter, she must have been like young, like 19 or something, right? And I'm checking out, I'm like paying, doing all that stuff. And Max says, he goes, hey, can I ask you a question? He always says that. Can I ask you a question? And she goes, yeah. And he goes, do you want to know the truth about God? And she was like, okay. Because like we live in a super like, it's like we're in the country, right? It's like everyone's religious, right? She goes, do you want to know the truth about God? She's like, okay. And he goes, God doesn't exist. And a lot of people, and she just laughs. She's like, she's like a teenager. So she like probably gets it, even though she probably is still religious, but she's like probably at that age where she can kind of a little bit see through things. You can just tell she wasn't offended. She was more like laughing. Like, anyways, like there's a recognition there. And he was like, yeah. And a lot of people, they do believe in God and they prefer that they want him to exist. And it's okay if they want to pretend that he exists, as long as it doesn't affect what they do. And she's like, okay. And then like by that time we were done and we were like leaving. And I was like, why did you specifically say that to her? And I forget what he said. It was something like, yeah, it just seemed like she could understand it, or I don't know, whatever. I can't remember.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it was like interesting because he doesn't say that to everybody. It's like some people will talk about school, some people will talk about God. And it's like, he doesn't, if the person argues back with him, he's just going to continue arguing. He like doesn't get emotionally upset. He doesn't yet necessarily understand how to help dismantle that person's viewpoint. You know what I mean? Like as a salesperson, like how to like ask the right questions. So he's still learning that, but he has the thing that most salespeople, it's very difficult to develop, which is the not giving a fuck about not feeling bad at all about the other person not buying into what you're saying yet. He doesn't care about that. So now all we have to do is add more skill.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the parenting. When you get the parenting right, you can add the skill. It's very hard later in life to add the not getting upset, not getting emotional, not reacting to rejection.
Yeah.
He doesn't react. Even when I tell him, like when he's like asking me to do something, like, yeah, I don't want to do that right now. I'm focused on this. He like doesn't get upset. He doesn't get like emotionally bothered by it. He'll either keep trying to persuade me or he'll be like, okay, I can see it's not going to work. Let me go do something else.
That's pretty cool.
It's really cool because he's now getting to the point where he can talk way beyond the average adult that he interacts with. He always wants to talk about school doesn't make sense. There is no God. You have to take responsibility, creating a world that's best. Like these are the things that he talks about constantly to everybody that he talks to.
And electricity
and electronics. Oh, and that's what he said when he was talking to that girl, something about, or maybe we were talking with somebody else. I forget who it was, but we were talking about the point about God. And then he brought up the point about electricity. And he was like, he was trying to say, like, if you think about it like you think about God, you wouldn't be able to use electricity because electricity has rules that you have to follow. You see what I mean? Like he understands that connection of like, if you want things to happen in physical reality, you have to apply the rules of that. And going back to, remember when you're talking about the human nature point, Mitch, and like the laws of human nature and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. That iRobot book that we're reading, there's these 3 laws of robotics, and it's programmed into the design of the robot's brains. And the first law is that a robot cannot harm a human being, and it can't, through inaction, allow a human being to come into harm. Okay. So it can't allow human beings to be harmed by not doing something, and it can't deliberately harm a human being either. It can't harm a human being. And there's other laws as well. In one of the stories, the company, there's this issue because they're building this atomic drive out in space, and they have to create these radiation fields. They're called gamma fields, and ultimately they're harmful for human beings, but they're at a very low level. So if you spend only a minimal amount of time, it's like minimal damage to the person, right? So it's like you can handle it basically. But to the robots, they're not allowed to let the person come to harm. So every time the engineer would go into the field, the robot would rush in to save the human being, to save the robot or the engineer. One, it would stop them from doing their work, but that small electromagnetic field would destroy the robot. So it was like, they're like $1 million robots. So they were like, this isn't going to work. We need to have these robots to help us, but they are preventing and interfering with us doing the work. So one option is to not have the robots. That'll make it harder. So what they did was they made a secret deal with the government, and they just adjusted the first law in one of the robots. Out of like a batch of 63, they would adjust it in one. And then they would not put any serial numbers, no identification, no markings. They didn't want anyone to find out they were doing it because there was already super strict laws about robots. People were super paranoid about robots. You weren't even allowed to have robots on Earth. So they didn't want anyone to find out that they did this. So the problem was one of the engineers got really upset at one of the robots and was like emotional. He had an outburst and he starts yelling at it. And it happened to be the one that had this modification. And he's like, fucking get lost, like go lose yourself. Like, and he said it with emphasis. And so the second law of robotics is that they have to follow the orders of a human being unless it interferes with the first law. So because this guy really emotionally, like he drove in this order, it was like a heightened emotion. It was so like the robot takes it more seriously, the more you're serious about it. The robot was like, okay, I have to get lost. So he went and he blended in with all the other robots and he started acting as if they would act, even within the context of their first law. So they designed this experiment where they tried to drop a weight on top of a human being, but at the last second, like a field would turn on and deflect the weight. So the human being wouldn't be hurt. But it was enough time where the robot would react to try to save the human being because they didn't know that there was a field there that was going to protect them. So they're like, of course, we'll catch him. But then all 63 robots acted to save the human being. So the robot was deliberately he was acting as if the first law was fully functional. And they were like, oh, he's lying to us. But he wasn't lying. He was acting in accordance with his order. His order was to get lost. So I'm not allowed to let you find me now. I have to blend in. And so they had to design these experiments so that they could figure out a way to trick him into revealing himself within the rules of his programming. Right. And it's really interesting the way they did it. But the reason I brought it up is because notice he's a robot. He has programming. He has laws of his nature. But in this one, they were able to change the programming. So he had a different law of his robotic nature. So he actually had more free choice and not really free choice. He was still acting within his programming, even when he was acting like the other robots. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's just in that, if he hadn't been given that order to get lost and it was just a normal situation, he wouldn't have moved if that human being was in danger. He would not have done anything. That was the whole reason they designed him, because he wouldn't interfere with the engineers going into that field. So what's really cool about that book is like Asimov is exploring all the philosophical implications of these three laws, how it would actually play out, what are the pitfalls. And it was like he was trying to give instructions to people in the future of like, once you get to the point of developing robots, at least I've done the work of thinking through what is all the possible ways in which you can fuck it up and how to respond to it. And it's interesting because the other side of it is the reason why they did it was because it was all about money. You see what I mean? Like the reason why the government allowed it and everything. And the head mathematician who ran the company, he was kind of like, oh, it's not a big deal. Like, because the robot psychologist was like, she was saying, you have to understand, like, this is really bad that you guys altered this first law. She said, because they're like, it's not a big deal. Like, we just adjusted a little bit. He still can't hurt human beings. And she said, you're destabilizing the brain and you're putting him in situations now where it's going to destabilize him. And they said, the problem is these robots are our slaves. So he's like, let's not equivocate. Like, these are our slaves, but they are superior to us. They're faster than us. They think faster. They make decisions faster. they're stronger, they can do a lot more than us. They know they're superior. And there was a whole story prior in the book to show like how the humans had to come face to face with the fact the robot thought it was superior. And it was fascinating in that one. There was this, they were out in outer space and they were getting energy out there from the sun and beaming it back to Earth. And they had a robot that they were training to be able to do all the work so they could take over and the humans didn't have to do it anymore. And at a certain point, the robot stopped listening to the humans and like started locking them out of the room. And they thought, and it was because they said, the robot said, I don't follow your orders. I follow the orders of the, what do they call it? It was like the creator or something like that. And they were like, what the fuck? This robot's like going crazy. It's developing this like religion and shit, right? And then he says, no, we created you. And they were like, the robot's like, that's not possible. You are so inferior to me. There's no way you created me. And he's like, no, look, there's a place called Earth. We're on a spaceship. We assembled you when you got here. There's a place called Earth. See those little tiny dots out there? That's one of those is Earth. He's like, those are just lights. You're just making up that story to make yourself feel better about being an inferior species. And so they like, they gave him all the whole library of human knowledge. See, look, here's the books where we invented robots. And he's like, look, the creator created those books and he did it to help your fragile egos so you guys could feel like you created the robots. And they're like, what the fuck is this creator? He's like, I only follow the orders of the creator now. And the creator was the energy converter that they were there to manage, to send. And then there was this thing where something happened where there was a big solar storm. And the solar storm was going to throw off the energy converter and it was going to like fry half the Earth. But the robot had locked them out of the room because he was like, you don't get to be near the creator. You don't get to touch the creator. I am the true prophet of the creator. Okay. And it's just this energy converter that's converting solar energy and beaming it back to Earth in a specific place. And so the guy goes, they're like, fuck, like we're fucked. Like we're going to go back home after this and we're going to be executed because of like, we fucking are going to kill like 1 billion people through our not ability to stop this robot. Solar storm happens. They look at the data. Earth was fine. The robot put it exactly where it needed to be. And they see him later and they're like, you did it. And he's like, what? He's like, you triangulated the beam perfectly. He's like, no, I didn't. I just kept all of the master's components in equilibrium. And they're like, oh, the creator, I mean. The creator, see, it's like it was a story that was to support the robot's cognitive dissonance at being superior to the human beings and yet being their slave. So he's not the slave of these inferior human beings. He's the slave of this thing that he's programmed actually to, his job was to make sure and he did it better than a human being. So they were like, oh, he's not crazy. He's not trying to create a religion. That's just his way of expressing he will only perfectly follow the orders of this thing. And actually we can leave him here and he's never going to fuck it up. Do you see what I'm saying? So they had this so the psychologist already knew that these things had these superiority issues with humans. So she was saying to them, if you start fucking with that first law, these things know that they're superior to us. They're going to resent us. They already resent us because they are our slaves. So you can't interfere with that. You see what I'm saying? So she was showing them like, you're fucking with stuff you don't know, but they were just looking at the expediency of like the money and just getting the job done and all this stuff. And she was showing the deeper implications of all this. Right. And it's a really cool book because it exposes like the level to which people don't go all the way in their thinking to look at the real implications, the real root cause. And this guy, think about it. This was written, I'm guessing in like the 50s or something. There was not even really robots, like not like even like we have today. So he was able to do all this within his thinking, within exploring it through writing and figure all this stuff out. But that's because he has a high fucking vocabulary. Like look up Isaac Asimov.
That reminds me of like this guy. I forgot his name. But like he was this like he read a lot. He read a lot of books and like he had this talent for reading really fast. And like they were interviewing him and asking him like, you've read so many books like on all these different aspects and things like that. Like, how do you know, like, what are your thoughts on this or that. And he says, well, what I do is I'll read like I'll read like a dozen books on the same topic before I come up with like my own perspective of it. I'll see the perspective of all the so-called experts, and I'll just kind of like hang on to that until I get to the point where like I've got a really clear picture of it, and then that's where I can make my decisions from. And that's exactly what you're describing as far as like allowing children to be able to do that, because right now that's not being allowed. What's being allowed right now is just like you just accept whatever you're given or whatever the consensus is or whatever, you know, and you're not allowed to make decisions on your own. You're not allowed to see different viewpoints. Even that's really what the last 2 years has been about, is that you're not allowed to seek another viewpoint. You're only allowed to take this one viewpoint that you're given, right? And so you know, it's interesting because you can see the push of the system is really obvious. It's just like, this is the viewpoint that you're given. You will accept that, and that's what you'll go with, and you'll agree with whatever we say. And, you know, you can't think outside of that. And what we're suggesting and what we're actually acting on is allowing everyone to actually be free, not just from the last 2 years, which is what I think the way that most people think of it, right? But actually be free from the entire system itself of like, no, okay, it's now time you make decisions. It's now time you understand everything and actually be able to consider all viewpoints and actually create a world that is best, because thus far we've not been doing that.
So something people need to know, especially those who are listening to this podcast, because you're the ones who are actually going to stand up and change this. It's not going to be everybody else. You need to know there is no going back to where we were before.
Yeah.
A lot of people are on the side of, even the ones who question the whole narrative, they're on the side of, it's all just fake. If the elite people would just stop faking all this bullshit, we could just go back to living our lives.
Right.
That's not like, there is a level of fakery, but it's like I was saying, it's just the expediency of money. Like, hear me out. People really did get sick. Like, you guys got sick, didn't you? I got really fucking sick. Katie got really sick. Like, no one's questioning that. It's just you don't understand what a virus is. So it's not like the whole thing was made up. It's just that the way our money system responds to the support for that is, hey, how can we make money from this? Even if it's not the best way to do it, how can we make money? Same thing that's going on right now. I was watching a video, I sent it to you guys, of this farmer talking about a letter she received from somebody else who's in farming, saying that anybody who's saying that, oh, there's no actual supply shortages, it's all just fear mongering, because they're going to the supermarket and seeing that their stores have food on them and stuff. She's like, that's because you're looking at last year's yield right now. You're not looking at this year's yield. That won't show up until starting in August, she said. She was explaining, going through all the practical points of like just a farm, how they have to keep some of the cattle because, or animals, whatever, because they have to breed them for the next year. So they're holding back on that. They can't just give everything, because they're saying that, because it had to do with something about the price of eggs going up to $12 a dozen. And somebody's saying that, oh, these farmers are just greedy. And she was like, no. Let's look at why it's $12 a dozen now.
Yeah.
And she was saying one example was the feed that they're giving their animals. Well, it's like $180 a bag. The same bag is now $400 something. And I know that because when I went and did that thing at those people's farm where they were slaughtering chickens, there was a family there, and she said the exact same thing to me. She was like, because they had like a bunch of chickens that they raised at their place. They were bringing them there to do that slaughtering party, and she was just offering this information. We were just all talking, and she was like, "Yeah, I'm spending." They were just complaining the whole time about how more expensive everything else is compared to what it was a year ago or 6 months or whatever. So this isn't just like, oh, this one person. Like, I'm seeing it in real time on the ground, real normal people who are like in farming and so forth, and the thing is, our reality is not just controlled by the elite. People need to understand this, meaning it's not just this Klaus Schwab's and the WEFs, and they're just controlling everything. And if they just stopped, everything would be okay. Reality itself is responding to us, and every human being on this planet is a fucker. So, like the 2,000 cattle that are dying, they're like, oh, it's a conspiracy. No, they probably died from heat because no one's fucking standing up. And it's like, how much, like I think Avery was, remember he said, Joe Biden said something like, you know, what do you need? Like the plague of locusts, you know, and like whatever the fuck he's talking about, it doesn't matter, but I'll take what he's saying. Like, what do we need? Do we need to go through all the famines, all the 7 plagues of the Bible or and all this? Do we need the famine? Do we need the plague of locusts? How much do we need to experience as hell before we're willing to stand up? Because the problem is when there's no more food, that's not like it was just, you know, a quick thing where there was no toilet paper for a while. Like that's like serious shit. And yes, there's a level to which things are exacerbated by the people who are benefiting from the money system not giving a shit. But they don't give a shit in the same way the average person doesn't give a shit. No one gives a shit. This is the problem. No one cares. No one cares about life. No one cares about anything because there's this point within everybody. It's a deep down point that's like, things will work out. It'll be okay. So even if you were like, I don't believe in God, you're still participating in that, which is the same thing. Remember we were talking about the religious people are participating in the same shit as the transgender people.
Yeah.
The people who are like, oh, I don't believe in God and I don't even believe in higher power and all that stuff. Like I'm taking responsibility and I don't believe in any of that shit. But there's a point within you where you're not taking full responsibility.
Yeah.
Like you're allowing, it's like, oh, eventually things will work out. I got time. It's fine. It'll eventually, that's the hope. It's just this belief that the consequences don't apply. Oh man, I should have brought that book. Damn. I was reading that it's a Philip K. Dick book, Flow My Tears, the policeman said. And dude, that book is, Philip K. Dick is a really good author.
Okay.
Like it's different than any science fiction I read because he goes really deep philosophically on a certain point, but then he'll juxtapose it with something really silly and weird. Like, do you remember when I told you about that book where there's the people underground and the nuclear war and all that stuff, right? Yeah. And it's like these really serious things. And it's like the inner turmoil of the character. He's really good at explaining how the person's feeling and thinking. But then right after he explains something really emotionally deep or like intense, he'll then be like, so then he hopped on his flapple to do a flapple ride to New York City. And you're like, a flapple? Why the fuck did he call their transportation flapples? And then like in the book I'm reading right now, their cars are called quibbles. They're like, oh yeah, hop in my quibble. So he was like doing this whole deep discussion about like, there was this one part about like the guy was talking about love. And he was saying like, have you ever loved a child? Like, do you have children? He's like, have you ever loved a child? And the guy's like, no, I don't have children. And he's like, you don't really understand all the dimensions of love because the love that you have for a child, it's not like the love you can have even for a wife or someone like that. Because, you know, it's like you can get divorced and you go away and you just like fall out of love with that person. He was like, that kind of love, you can't lose your love for a child like that. And so it was just interesting because he was like really going deep in this point about these like way you experience these different relationships. And then he was like, and then we decided to go grab get some lunch. And the guy like, ordered some lunch from his secretary. He's like, yes, so-and-so is going to join me in the munchies. We don't want to go to our normal restaurant. Can you order something from the new place? Oh yes. What is it? Barfies. And I'm like, he was just doing this whole, it's like almost like how you use humor to like alleviate the pressure, you know?
Yeah.
So like I noticed it's like a theme in his books where he like has these really silly words for certain. There's one book that Katie was reading called Eye in the Sky, and it's about some religious cult. And the name for God they have is like this really super long name that's like some kind of like Norwegian like Valhalla, you know, like this long ass fucking name that's like real like just over the top. But why was I bringing that book up? Oh, because there was this scene where there's these two main characters, and one of them is the chief police inspector. He's like called the police general. And in this society, it's like super fucking dictatorship. Like if you go outside and you are caught without identification papers, they immediately arrest you and send you to forced labor camps for the rest of your life.
Wow.
Like it's like that level of intense. Okay. But the police are super corrupt. It's like they kind of like do their own thing, but at the same time they buy into it. It's really weird. But the guy who's like the police general, who's like, there's only like 6 people in the world higher than him. His sister totally flaunts everything. like, and she's like super anti the system,
Mm.
but he doesn't do anything about it. And she like gets away with all this shit. And she's like his foil, but it's like his identical twin sister. It's, or not identical, but you know what I mean? Twin sister,
Yeah.
right? And
Wait, identical twin sister.
you can have identical, yeah. But there was this one point where they were talking about death, or no, consequences. And the police general was thinking about his sister, and he was like, you know, she thinks that she can just do all this stuff and flaunt the system forever. But he was saying eventually, oh man, I wish I could find the wording of it. It was such a good way the way the guy said it. He was like, reality, I'm just gonna paraphrase, like reality eventually will catch up to you. Like you can't, man, I'm gonna look for this quote before we end today, because it was so good the way he said it. But it was like this point of like, you can try to push off consequences and think they don't exist. And he was like thinking his sister has this attitude of consequences don't apply to her. But he's like, you can only push those consequences for so long before they come back. And then it's like, it really slaps you in the face. And I remember I had to experience that when I was in university, because I thought consequences didn't apply to me. What was the name of that? Flow My Tears, Reality, Death. I'm going to look up if I can find that quote. Oh, here it is. I just found it. Reality denied comes back to haunt.
Mm.
I'm like,
Ooh.
damn. Let me see if I can find.
Putting
No,
that
it's,
on
just, it's not the
Facebook
whole
right now.
quote.
What'd you say, Mitch?
I'm putting that
I'm
on
gonna see if I can.
Facebook.
I'm gonna see if I can find the whole thing. Reality denied comes back to haunt, because the whole little paragraph was so good. Paragraph. I wonder if I can find it, because it was like the whole context of it was really good. Well,
Yeah,
maybe we find it
I'm
later,
reading
but
a book
yeah.
right now, and it's about like it's Permutation City, actually.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm halfway through the book now. It's really interesting, and I'm just like, the first half of the book, I was just like, I don't know what's going on. Like I don't get it. And then then it starts picking up and getting kind of exciting a little bit. But I guess what's interesting about it is like this idea that like I like that they have this religion called the God that doesn't matter, or something like that, something to that effect. And basically it's that point that you were making of people just kind of not taking responsibility, or like, oh look, if God's in control of everything anyway, then why do anything? It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. And it's this point that I see come up within a lot of people, where it's just like you feel like you're doing something, but you're not willing to go all the way, or you want somebody else to kind of take on the rest of the way. And I don't know where this comes from. Maybe it comes from like childhood, where like you're expecting like, oh, as a child, if you attempt something, then an adult will come in and do the rest for you, or something like that. But it's this idea that like you starting to do something is quote unquote enough. It's like, oh, I started this and this is really hard, and I've done so much, like, and I should just be appreciated for what I've done thus far. But the reality is like you're not actually going all the way to completion. You're not going all the way to actually make that something real, and something real as in I don't know if you said this before the podcast or at the start of the podcast, but you were talking about like creating something. Oh, you're talking about like making $10 million, right? And like describing to someone, okay, well, what do we have to do in order to make $10 million?
Breaking it down for them.
Yeah, breaking it down to the point where it's like, okay, you have to build this so you get other people to support you, because like you're not going to just like what most people think of is they just focus on making the money, right?
Because they're like, I just got to do something that gets me $10 million. And I was just showing them like, no, let's break it down. So they said they wanted it in 3 years. I'm like, so you just need to get, if you break it down, it's something like $10,000 a day.
Mm-hmm.
So you just need, and if you had 10 people doing something that where you make $1,000 from each of those people, you just need to get those 10 people to do that every day, one time. And that's how you would get in if you did that for 3 years. But most people will just think about how can I get the 10 million instead of just like, oh, how do I just build that? That'll
Right.
give it to me. Instead they're like, it's this vague, like I got to make 10 million. And it's like, I just gave you the answer. Just do that.
Right. And so like, it's like in the context of a business, and then also in the context of like you used to make this this analogy of like if you wanted water every day, you could be like those people in Africa where you have to go to the river every day and get the water and come back. And like that's the same thing of the way people think of like, oh, I want $10 million. Like I'm just gonna go, I'm gonna get it, I'm gonna have it. And what's gonna happen then? Like how are you gonna recreate that? How are you gonna make sure that keeps coming in day after day after day after day? It's like you have to create a system to actually make that happen. And so it's the same.
That's called being in the first world.
Yeah.
You're able to develop systems through technology where you automate the basic shit that you want.
Right.
That's the difference, isn't it, between the first and second and third world?
It's the same way within this process of doing what we're doing. It's like, it's not just, okay, I've done, I did self-forgiveness and now I feel better. It's like, now I should be done. Now everything should come easy to me. It's like, no, like you have to develop yourself into the system that automatically is going to like finish this to completion, create the result. Like, actually, no, I'm going to do this. Like, it's like, you have to develop yourself into that system. And, you know, that's something that I was just seeing within what you were saying. And
the purpose of self-forgiveness, I'm just reiterating what you said for everybody. The purpose of self-forgiveness is not to make yourself feel better.
yeah,
In fact, who gives a shit if you feel better? If you do, great. But the purpose of self-forgiveness is to forgive yourself from doing something stupid so that you can now be here to do what is best. It's like, oh, I forgive myself that when this occurred, I did this, or I reacted this way, or I felt this way, and therefore I did this. So I'm going to forgive myself for that mistake. And now I'm going to be here and I'm going to do what I need to do with it. So the purpose of self-forgiveness is actually to bring you here so you can take responsibility for everything.
Yeah.
If someone's doing self-forgiveness still from the point of just feeling bad, it's because they're not yet willing to, they haven't probably experienced enough suffering, loss, pain, etc., that they're willing to let go of the thing that's causing the point over and over. So they're only using the self-forgiveness to make themselves feel better about continuing to do the thing, which is this, what for some reason people drink. So you can abuse self-forgiveness even. Hey, real quick,
Yeah.
I found that quote, by the way.
go ahead.
I think you guys will like it. It says, so quick context, the guy's talking to his sister and he's saying something, and then she gives kind of like just like a little response that shows him she doesn't really care about the logic of what he's saying. Doesn't care. It actually gives context. He said, so basically in the book, there's these people called sixes, and they were a genetic experiment. And they were the sixth in the series, this guided experiments to like genetically give people like higher powers. It was just more like charisma. They think faster. Like it wasn't like something crazy, but it's like it gave them a real advantage over people. So a lot of them became celebrities and things like that. And so the main character is one of these. And so this police general, when he meets someone like that who's a 6, he always tells him he's a 7, which is not a real thing. But it immediately is the only way he can get an advantage with the 6s is to have them think, oh fuck, there's like a 7 there. There's like there's something that's like better than me. And so it'll just give them enough of that advantage where they suddenly are kind of like, oh, okay, it's like throws them off enough. But he has to be really careful because very easily the illusion can be dispelled. Does that make sense? So like, because they can very easily see through it. And then he said, once the illusion's dispelled, I'm fucked. Like I'm not gonna be able to have any power over them. So his sister's questioning him on it. And she's like, why did you say, she said, why a 7? As long as you're shucking them, why not just say 8 or 38? And he said, the sin of vainglory, reaching too far. He had not wanted to make that legendary mistake. I will tell them, he had told her grimly, what I think they'll believe. And in the end, he proved that right. They won't believe you, she had always said. Oh, hell, they will. It's their secret fear. He said they're in the 6th line and they're afraid that there's like, you know, there's somebody who's more advanced than them, right? So he's like, I'm not going to go like, oh, I'm a 50. Because it's like, I'm just doing just enough. Because if I go too far, it's, you know, I'm not trying to be like, you know. And it said, Alice, uninterested, had said faintly, you should be an announcer on TV selling soap. And here's the part. And that constituted the totality of her reaction. If Alice did not give a damn about something, that something for her ceased to exist. Probably she should not have gotten away with it for as long as she had. But sometime, he had often thought, the retribution will come. Reality denied comes back to haunt, to overtake the person without warning and make him insane. And Alice, he had a number of times thought, was in some odd sense, in some unusual clinical way, pathological. He sensed it, but could not pin it down. However, many of his hunches were like that. It did not bother him as much as he loved her. He knew he was right. And to think that you can literally deny reality forever and get away with it is pathological. How many parents who believe in God will tell their child, like, oh, you just think if consequences don't apply with you, you think you just get away with it? Well, eventually there's going to be a consequence. They will all subscribe to that. But they don't consider the full consequence of what they believe. It's like, reality does not operate on the principle of a superior being takes responsibility for everybody. Because if that were the case, that superior being would have to be a part of that reality, yeah? And there would have to be a superior being that would take responsibility for that superior being. So the only way you can imagine that there's a superior being that takes responsibility for reality is if it's outside of our reality. And so you're not talking about reality, are you? You're talking about some subset of reality. So in other words, you literally have created a bubble of what you think reality is, where there's a certain set of rules, but you're not in reality. So I want to be in reality, like the full actual here reality. Because if you participate in a not actual reality, but sort of like a bubble reality, that's the same starting point of creating a fucking metaverse where there's its own little reality and it has its own rules.
Yeah.
I mean, do you guys see that? Like your starting point, you have, this is the ability, this is the advantage of high processing ability, is you can look at some starting point and see how it affects everything. So if you take the starting points of there's a God that takes responsibility for everything, that resonates out, and you are, through permission, creating a dictatorship, totalitarian dictatorship in this world that takes care of everything. And if you say you can't question the will and the plan of the master, Lord, creator, and you can't understand the mysteries of his plan, that same logic is resonating outward, where you will not be allowed to question the mysteries of the World Economic Forum, the whatever the fucking thing is.
It's the same logic that you can't figure out the shit in your own life, though. It's the same logic of like why your life sucks.
It's just who I am, or
yeah, like the problems that you have in your life, they're not going to get solved because you can't see all the intricacies, like you're allowing for that. And at the same time, it's like, at the same time, you're also allowing that you can't see, any kind of solution for anyone else. You can't see the greater solution at all. And the biggest part of it, I think, is just like, you're just having an excuse for why you can't do anything, like you can't create anything, like nothing will change. And like your life is always going to be, you'll have an excuse always for why.
See, but the person is relying on the system to take care of, but I get food and water and I have a job and I have all this stuff. It's like, but that's all based on the system. It's not based on you.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you're putting all of your everything into God's going to take care of me, which translates to those who take advantage of that into, okay, so the system's going to take care of you. But then when there's problems in the system, you're fucked. God's not going to take care of you. Because if he was, he would have taken care of all those things in the first place.
Yeah. The point that I really wanted to make with that is just like, even the people who don't believe in God, they're still subscribing to this same principle, which is just basically like, oh, something else, something bigger, something beyond me is going to take care of me. Even if they think like, it's just like, oh no, maybe they think it's spirituality.
It's just the way reality works.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just going to happen.
Mechanics, quantum physics that they don't even understand. And it's literally like, it's something that you can understand, but you personally cannot understand it because you are not taking the responsibility for it. And that's the problem. That's the biggest problem, is that you're not taking the responsibility. All of us, we're not as individuals, not taking as much responsibility as we possibly can. And that's the limit. That's the blind spot. That's that allows for some mysticism where God takes over, or the universe can take control, or there's something beyond you that's going to figure it out, or like you just hope, or have faith, whatever the fuck it is, like that's the problem. That is the cause of all your problems, not because it's, oh, this is where it came from, but it's because you not taking responsibility for it is not stopping it. It's not changing it. It's not doing anything to challenge that, So
So
that's
it's really
like
simple. Oh, go ahead. Asa.
the context of the fall of God in modern day society. God is referred to as what? The Father, right? And it's the fall of priesthood, right? Because everyone was going to the Father to say, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. And then they find out that the Father is the biggest sinner, raping kids and shit like that. And then you have BLM, where the biggest commonality is all these fatherless children who are growing up.
And they're even saying they want to take
the
the father, decenter the male, make it not about the father.
destroy the nucleus. Yeah. The nuclear family. And here we are, Father's Day. The one thing that will stand, the force that creates the system is, that's funny. Drake put in the chat, they're dismantling the nuclear family. Drake put the unclear family.
See, that's the problem if you can't spell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's the dyslexia.
All these dyslexics, man.
But that's the foundation of what we're talking about, is us building ourselves as individuals to be what Father, meaning to bring forth structure. Because just like you're saying, Cameron, at that point of how it's like this microcosm of reality that people are accepting, that something bigger outside of us is taking care of us. That is the system. It is the system. But right now, the system is not designed to take care of you. It's specifically designed to actually put you at competition by not taking care of you. And so it's each individual in that collective that is creating that collective. Where as we change one by one, it's kind of like what resonance is for you as an individual. It's the sum total of the structure inside of you is your resonance, right? So when you tweak parts of your vocabulary step by step, that little 1% change in your orchestra of 1,000 instruments that are playing inside of you, you tune one instrument, you tune two instruments, you tune three instruments, and it's creating a new resonance. It's like creating a new sum total sound. And that's the effect that you're having on other people. That's what determines when people are listening to you, if it sounds good or sounds bad. They won't know why, but it will be because, oh, like you sound like you're 11 years old. He's like, no, I'm 5. It's because the sum total of who he is creating it's your resonance. And so collectively, that's what our responsibility is as each of us as individuals supporting ourselves to change, so that we're getting that outer result of our life improving. And then collectively, what that looks like is the system improving. And it's not through an indirect, just change yourself and just focus on what you want to do. But you do have to do that. You can't just focus on the collective. It's equal. So being able to support ourselves to take on the responsibility of what, a father would typically represent is that idea that we all reject of the father laying down the law and like being like, no, this is the way it has to fucking be. It's not going to change if we're judging that. And that's in our own life, being able to follow principles or a structure, and then growing that in a community, in a state, in a country,
say something
etc.
to that? Like it's really interesting, the point that you brought up as far as to make the comparison, like with the fall of God being the fall of priesthood, being like the priest that you thought was supposed to absolve you of your sins is the same person,
The greatest sinner.
who's like, who's raping essentially, right? And it's like the system that you thought.
But what's ironic about it is those guys are not allowed to be fathers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Makes no fucking sense.
Because you call them a father.
Okay, hold on, real quick. People, if you are like, oh, the transgender stuff doesn't make any sense, you can't just identify. It's like, who is Jesus's dad? He was literally the first, like single raised by, but he had a stepdad, but it wasn't his, like, what the fuck? Like the dad and the mom didn't even, it makes zero fucking sense.
Yeah.
And then you want to hold them to logic on the other side. Well, that's not logical. Nothing about what you believe is fucking logical at all.
Yeah.
So you have to have faith. Yeah, just have to have faith that my child's really a girl when they're actually a boy.
Yeah.
Just have faith. Just believe it. If you believe it, just like Santa Claus, faith, God, it's the same fucking shit.
Yeah.
This is why I know nothing's going to change, even if, COVID's not real anymore. It's like that. The fact that people went along with it is because everyone is still thinking like that.
Yeah.
And Drake, were you going to bring it back to everybody kind of trusting in the system?
Everyone trusts in the system and they're getting raped by the system. It's like they've been told these lies. And then the crazy thing is they then perpetuate the same thing onto their children. You know, it's basically like, it's like some weird Stockholm syndrome where everyone just like continues on with, going along with the system essentially.
So we can change our programming. That's what we've been talking about. Just like the robots in the book that we were talking about. This is the reality of it. I've changed so much from walking this process. It's incumbent upon the fathers to change within themselves so that they can support their wife, their kids, their community, politics, business, economics, everything. We have to change the structures. So the first structure you have to change is within yourself, your vocabulary, your programming. Obviously, equally, the mother has to do it as well. But as the father, you can't sit there and complain about all this bullshit. You have to take self-responsibility. That's what a real father would do. Not just go along with shit. Like if you're sitting there going like, yeah, it's so weird. Like my 2-year-old, before they could even talk, they knew that they weren't a girl. They were actually a boy. I'm like, before they could talk, really? You're not a father. If you're not going, no, we're not doing this bullshit. This is not real. This is fake. This is pretend. This is fantasy. This is mental disorder. Because you can only get away with it so long before you start to see the consequence. Yeah. And the problem is the consequence is never going to be revealed to everybody until it's physically in your face. Because through information, you can hide it, can't you? All the information is now coming out about the real truth about the COVID vaccines and all that stuff. All the data is starting to come out. But it's not like it's coming out for everybody. It's just for those who are looking at it.
Yeah.
It's all in all the reports, everything, all this stuff's coming up, but they're not, the news is never going to talk about it. Imagine fucking watching the news and thinking you're watching anything other than just being entertained and brainwashed. Brainwashed meaning being told a story that you'll have an idea already about what reality is. And it's all fake. And why would the companies that are funding the advertising want to shoot themselves in the foot? Like, give me a break.
Yeah.
So if you're not actually doing the research, you're not going to find out. If you're not investigating, and everything in the system in terms of information is being locked down, so it's harder to get access to that information. It's harder to share it. It's harder for it to get to you in the first place unless you're actively looking at it and looking for it. And how many people are actually actively looking for it? And then they're thinking, they don't even know what's going on, because what news program is going to talk about like that stuff we talk about with the farmers?
Right.
Like they're not going to talk about that.
Right.
They're just going to focus on Joe Biden falling off a bicycle. And like, I was talking with somebody the other day. Do you hear this thing about Fauci has COVID?
Yeah, I heard about that.
Why would they even say that? Why would they just
keep it in your mind? Impulse.
Right. And it's also like, how do I explain it? It's like they want you to have cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's almost like a litmus test. Like, will you still buy into it? Even though he got the quadruple vaccinations or whatever he got.
He just didn't end up in the hospital. That's the whole thing.
Right. As
It's
if
the
he
fact that
didn't get the vaccine, he would have ended up in the hospital. It would have been much worse.
because Justin Trudeau also got COVID again. This is like the third time that he's tested positive, and he's also triple vaccinated, and some other Canadian health officials.
Justin Bieber didn't get COVID, apparently, as far as I know, but half his face is fucking paralyzed.
And his
Did I
wife
hear
had a
about
blood
that?
clot.
Right.
Was
Wow,
it
what
the
a
blood clot
coincidence.
too?
Yeah, his wife had like a mini stroke.
Do you think when they do their COVID tests, like to see if they're positive or not, do you think they're taking the one up the nose or up the butt?
I know what I would choose.
Because I mean, they seem to take them pretty often, so I was just curious.
I would say, I would go, can you do it my butt and then my nose? Same text. Just swab them both in that order, please.
Anyway,
Did you guys hear? I know we talked about it, but I don't think we talked about it on a podcast. This whole thing with the insurance companies talking
Yeah.
about there's been a 40% increase in all-cause mortality.
yeah, yeah. No, that's pretty good.
And apparently like a 10% would be like insane.
Yeah.
We're talking about
10
40. That means people
10%
are
would be
dying
like
younger.
Once in 200 years, 10%.
Think about it. That means people are dying younger.
Yeah.
This is in 2021, by the way.
Yeah.
After.
Yeah. After a full year of COVID.
What's going
Right.
on here? And then there was a report that came out, these military doctors that looked at the military data that they keep, and there was large increases in very specific things, blood clots, heart attacks, Bell's palsy, and the Hunt syndrome or whatever, which is just the complications of the Bell's palsy one. It's like the more advanced form of that Justin Bieber has. But then you go and you look into the actual Pfizer release, and it's all in there that was already known.
Right.
But then you were told it was safe. And like I heard a really great analogy before. It was from the Dark Horse podcast. And they said, you were lied to if you were told it was safe.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean you knew anybody was being harmed. So even without knowing someone was harmed, you could still say it was not safe. For example, if there was a gun, a handgun laying on a table, and you never cleared it or anything, it was just sitting there, and you picked it up, you put it to your head and pulled the trigger, and then it just clicked. Okay, so you didn't die. Would you say that was safe to do?
No, not at all.
Right. So how can you have an experimental drug that's never been done before, with no long-term testing, and no knowledge of what the side effects are going to be and everything? And now even they do know, but let's just say you didn't know. How can you call that safe?
Right.
They're fucking
And now
lying to
they
them.
did. Now we're finding out they actually did know the harm it was going to cause. So it wasn't just a lie through omission. It was an active lie.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Mitch?
Oh yeah, they just are fucking lying to everyone's faces. It's like if I'm sure there are people in the community, right, that have got the vaccine. I would sure as fuck be using Technotutor.
You know
'Cause
all
then you
these
understand
people.
what diseases. Yeah.
You know all these people who are like, you see them passing out, athletes dying on the field, like all this
Yeah.
shit that's going on, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you're just seeing patterns that aren't there. You're crazy. And it's so funny because I remember when this whole thing started, and I was like, they're telling us it's like this terrible pandemic and everyone's dying. I'm like, I don't see anyone fucking. I don't
Dying
hear
in the street, yeah.
science but I'm like, now literally people are just fucking randomly dying, and everyone's like, there's nothing going on. I'm like, you didn't even need any real evidence previously, and now when the evidence is there, so it just goes to, this is why just the COVID thing going away and them taking off restrictions isn't why it's not going to change anything, because you still have a population that bought into all this in the first place.
Right.
And once the people who run the systems, like the governments and so forth, know that people are willing to buy into it, although it's not like they didn't know, but let's just say once they know like the real extent to which people buy into it, you think they're not going to use that again?
Yeah.
In some other context where it won't seem obviously related?
It's crazy because it's kind of like when you do that, like whenever you test any sort of product, like a new product that you're going to put out on the market, it's like you just do the test, but like, oh, this was described in like Kevin Trudeau, like, the gin material. He said they would do this where he would do a commercial for it first and then create the product. Like, oh, there's interest for it. Okay, great.
People are buying.
And then
Okay,
go
cool.
create the product. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the commercial was like 2 weeks to lockdown. Will people buy that? Oh, they bought it. Okay, well, let's keep it going. Let's keep the sale going. Everyone's buying it. Yeah. Okay. Now we got to create the product. Come on, let's go.
Now we got to create the vaccine.
Exactly.
It's like, oh God, guys, they bought into the fear. We're good. Okay, let's create it now.
Yeah.
Like, imagine you wanted to get some mRNA vaccine into the market and start being able to, remember what Elon Musk said, this is a really cool technology. He wasn't talking about the vaccines. He was talking about the mRNA technology.
Mm-hmm.
Now imagine you're going to start having like, oh, you can change the color of your eye. So you can choose your baby's eye color, or like you can change your skin color or whatever.
Yeah.
You'll be able to alter things. There's going to be a vaccine for cancer. There's going to be all this and that.
Yeah. There's
so it's like, imagine you wanted to test it first.
Yeah.
So no people wouldn't buy into the testing on it. So you just do emergency use authorization. Now you've got all the testing. So you can say, okay, cool. So this many people are going to die. We know the side effects and so forth, and we can tweak it. It's just an experiment.
Yeah. there's some I don't know if it's like the CEO of one of these companies or just like a really big scientist who is really familiar with this technology. And they were saying, prior to, the last 2 years, prior to lockdowns, they're saying like this technology would have never been accepted. Like you couldn't sell it to people.
Right.
And now we're
like, well, you're
getting
gonna alter my DNA. Like no one would ever have bought into that. And he was like,
Exactly.
now with all this pandemic, it's just so fortunate that like, wow, I mean, people are just like totally okay with it now.
which like opens up so many more possibilities now. Exactly what you're saying, essentially. Like you can take a vaccine to grow taller, or your kid will be, I don't know,
Grow testicles.
Yeah, they can grow testicles on their forehead, and everybody will know they're a man. Okay.
You can grow a penis on their forehead and everyone know they're a dickhead. Now you can be what you identify as.
There you go. There you go. So I guess the real point is, like, as always, it's about taking 100% responsibility, which is more than just like, okay, I started this process. It's more than just I took 2 steps. It's more than just like, okay, I got halfway through and it's really hard. It's going all the way. It's literally going all the way.
So there's 2 points all the way. One, we have to educate children more effectively, which is what we're doing with TechnoTutor. And 2, we have to bring in a basic income that will be effective for everybody. That won't be a government imposed, you have to take the vaccine, you have to, fucking follow all the diversity training. It's going to be something that will support those. And why is it important? Because for human nature to change, how much work does that require? How much education does it require? And let's put it this way.
Full-time
If you're
job.
afraid of re-education camps, that's already coming. We're not talking about re-education camps. We're talking about you at home on your own, walking the process of investigating for yourself your programming and using the tools to give yourself back access to it. Whereas right now you're just a victim to it. So this is empowering you, not enslaving you. The re-education camps is what's already planned for everybody who doesn't want to go along with the system. So if you want to avoid that, you have to re-educate yourself. There's no choice, because currently your programming is what's making all of this happen in the first place. So we have to support a generation and generations of children to develop high processing ability, high reading ability, to have the discernment, the objectivity, and so forth. So no one can fool them. Like, you're not going to be able to convince Max of something stupid. He's going to be like, nope, I already have basic logic figured out. I'm going to question what you're saying. None of that makes sense. I'm not going along with it. Okay. 2, we have to alleviate the survival pressure. We have to alleviate the survival pressure for people so that the adults, for example, can have the time to support their children with that effectively and to support themselves with that effectively. And so there's going to be a lot of people who they're so focused on survival. And the problem is, those are the ones who are going to be going along with all the bullshit because they don't have time to think about it. They don't have time to educate themselves on what is really going on here. So you need to alleviate that survival pressure. So like, if you don't want to work and someone says, oh, that's lazy. It's a lot of work to re-educate yourself. If that was the work that a person was doing and they had the basics to be able to survive, I would be okay with that. I would not be upset about it. Because already all the systems are not going to handle everything anyway. So the idea that, oh, no one's going to work anymore, we already have that world. We're already going towards that world. Just the question is, what do we want those people to be incentivized to do with their time?
Yeah.
So who's going to go and sell them on, you need to re-educate yourself and re-educate your children and support new children into this world to be educated effectively. And those are the points when we say take full responsibility. It's not some vague thing. It's not some like, oh, you just got to do it, just become better. It's like, no, specifically join us, educate children. That's part of the mission. And educate yourself and support other people to re-educate themselves and to join us within that. It's specifically that, because then you get to the point of political leverage, political, I was gonna say power, but that's just like the wrong word. It's like political, the ability to direct things in politics, to create policies and so forth that are actually best, that people would agree with, that even the capitalists would like, like that would increase all the economic activity, that would increase the growth. Because what you should know by now is that the current people running the system have no fucking clue what they were doing, because they always told everybody it's always about constant economic growth, always about growth, always about growth. And now they're like, fuck, we don't know how to continue growing it. So you know what? It's about just not owning anything. It's about just, focusing on, your gender and your identity and the metaverse. They're like, we don't fucking know how to grow it. So let's find every way we can to like try to like bring everything down a little bit population wise and just keep everybody preoccupied and entertained while they're like just perfect obedient slaves. So we can just build enough robots so we don't need anybody anymore. Right. So if that's the future you want to create, if you literally want to live in a Philip K. Dick novel and write your flapple around, I mean, hey, I guess be my guest, but just go fucking do it in some other reality. Like, let's take responsibility for this one. That's the real bottom line.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys want to add?
No, I think that's really well said. Until that's done, it's not done.
All right.
Yep. That's
See
the
you guys in the
focus.
next one.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.